Oh yeah, last video. Hello and welcome back. My name is Regan. I am a photographer and today I'm here to break down and demystify ISO so you feel more comfortable and confident using the manual modes on your camera. Let's do it. In the last two videos, I broke down aperture and shutter speed. Along with ISO, these make up the exposure triangle. Each of these three things affects the brightness or the darkness of your image, also known as exposure. But each one also affects one other factor that is a trade-off for the brightness in your image. Today, we're gonna break down ISO. ISO affects two different things. It affects the brightness and it affects the graininess or noise in your image. Now, pay attention because this is different from the other videos. The higher your ISO number, the more light you have in your image and the more grain and noise. The lower your ISO in your image, the less light you have, but you also have less grain and noise. Now you know all of this is theoretical, so let's jump into some concrete examples so this starts to make sense. If you watch the aperture video, you're gonna be like, wow, that setup looks similar, because it is the same. Okay, first I wanna show you how ISO affects the brightness of your image. So we're gonna do that in manual mode, and we're going to freeze all of our settings. We're gonna set our ISO to something middle of the line. Let's do 640 and see what that looks like. All right, now if we lower our ISO, you'll see that there is less light in the image and it's darker. This is ISO 100. If we increase our ISO, let's take it to something like 1600, our photo will be much brighter. So remember, the lower the ISO, the less light you have, the higher the ISO, the more light you have and the more brightness. Now remember, this one is a trade-off. Not only does ISO affect exposure, it also affects the graininess of your image. Let's go back to ISO 100 because this is where we'll have the very, very least amount of grain. Looking at our background, you'll see that we have basically no grain. Let's bump it up to ISO 640. Honestly, not much grain. Again, let's keep going. Let's raise this one really high up to ISO 4000. I know that's not a lot for some people, but that's a lot on a crop sensor camera. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, there you have it. Once again, remember, the lower your ISO number, the less light you can let in, but also the less grain or noise that you have in your image. The higher the ISO number, the more light you can let in, but you're letting in and you're allowing a lot more noise and grain as well. What ISO should you use? Now, in the other videos, I mentioned that things like background blur and motion blur can be used for an artistic quality, and sometimes people choose to use those. I don't often see people choosing to use high ISOs unless they just absolutely have to. With ISO, I think you should go for the lowest ISO number that you can while balancing the amount of motion blur and the amount of background blur in your image from the two others. I shoot on a crop sensor camera. I shoot on the A6400, and I'm often shooting in studio, so I keep my ISO at 100 all the time. When I'm shooting outdoors, I try to keep it below 800 as well, but I'm usually shooting in very ideal conditions. I'm not shooting at night, I'm not shooting like weddings or anything like that. So try to keep your ISO as low as possible, but also don't be afraid to bump it up if you need to. If you missed the last two videos on aperture and shutter speed, I'm gonna link them somewhere around here. But make sure to go watch those and subscribe for more photography basics and tutorials and all kinds of fun photography things. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!